The Galactic Council heard the human's name and panicked. The door was still sliding open when the first alien turned to look at me. Not with curiosity, with something closer to calculation. I was already walking, clipboard in one hand, travel bag on my shoulder, a half-eaten protein bar in my jacket pocket because nobody had told me there would be food on the shuttle, and I had not eaten since Tuesday. The corridor leading into the main assembly chamber of the Galactic Council stretched ahead of me for what felt like a full city block, and it was lit in colors I did not have names for, somewhere between violet and something else entirely. My name is Kira Voss. I am 34 years old. I hold a mid-level diplomatic attaché position with the United Earth Office of Interstellar Relations, which sounds important until you learn that the office has 11 employees, 2 of whom are interns, and that our annual operating budget is smaller than the catering spend for a mid-size corporate conference. I was sent here because no one else wanted to come. That is not me being modest. Director Paul Whitmore told me directly in those exact words while handing me a folder of briefing documents so thin I could bend it in half. Kira, I will be honest with you. Nobody else wanted to come. He paused. There is a chance this whole council thing is just a formality, a meet and greet. You go, you sit quietly, you smile when they smile, and you come home with some notes. He paused again. Do not cause any incidents. I told him I understood. He looked like he wanted to say something else. He did not. So here I was, sole human representative at the 62nd session of the Galactic Council, walking down a corridor that smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet and old, surrounded by beings from 41 different civilizations, and trying very hard to find the bathroom before proceedings began because the shuttle ride had been 11 hours long. The chamber itself was extraordinary. I will admit that freely, even now, knowing everything that followed. It was circular. The ceiling was so high it was effectively sky. Rings of curved seats rose in tiers from a central floor area, and every seat was occupied by someone who had evolved on a world I had never seen, breathing air I could not always identify, watching me walk in with expressions I was not yet trained to read. Some of them had 4 eyes. Some of them had none that I could detect. One delegation near the back appeared to be a single organism that occupied 3 seats simultaneously. Its body arranged across all of them with the casual comfort of a person who has never once had to worry about legroom. I found my seat. It was in the last row. Specifically, it was wedged between a sealed environment pod, opaque, humming quietly, belonging to a methane-adapted species whose name I could not pronounce, and an empty chair with a small plaque on it that read, in 7 languages, "Reserved, pending biological clearance." I sat down. I opened my briefing folder. The first page read, Humanity Tier 4 Observer Status Provisional, Speaking Rights, None at this time, Voting Rights, None at this time, Recommended Conduct, Observational. I turned the page. The second page was a map of the chamber with my seat helpfully circled in red pen. Someone had drawn a small arrow pointing to it and written, "You are here," next to it. I looked around the chamber. Nobody was paying attention to me. That was fine. That was expected. That was, as Director Whitmore had said, probably the appropriate level of human significance at this stage. We had been spacefaring for 61 years. We had cracked faster-than-light transit 40 years ago. We had made contact with 3 other species before the Council reached out to us, and those 3 species had each reacted with varying degrees of alarm and then begrudging respect. We were, by galactic standards, infants, toddlers. We had not yet learned to walk properly across the cosmos, and we were already showing up at formal dinners with mud on our shoes. I did not mind. I am patient. I got the protein bar out of my pocket and ate the rest of it. Across the chamber in the second row from the front, I spotted the Voreth delegation. I recognized them from the briefing files, tall, silver gray, with elongated skulls and the particular posture of beings who had held political power for so long it had become physiological. They were the oldest active council members. They had been part of this body for, according to my notes, approximately 12,000 years. One of them glanced in my direction. I gave a small, polite nod. He looked away immediately, not rudely, more the way you might look away from a potted plant that you just noticed was in the wrong corner of the room. I did not take it personally. Beside the Voreth sat the Quelari, who looked like nothing so much as tall blue-green trees that had decided to develop opinions. Their branches moved slowly, constantly, not from any breeze but from what the briefing notes described as ambient communicative reflex. They were always talking to each other, always processing. The notes said they were the most peaceful species in the known galaxy and had not engaged in any form of organized conflict in over 100,000 years. They did not look at me at all. And then there were the Shenvar, clustered near the front left arc of the chamber, and the Daelri, who moved in a way that made my inner ear mildly unhappy, and the representatives of the commerce guilds of 3 different star systems, and the Environmental Observation Collective, and the chair of the council's judicial arm, a being named something that the translator in my earpiece rendered as the one who weighs, which I thought was either deeply poetic or very straightforward, and I could not decide which. And then there was the representative from the Yeth Concordat. I noticed her because she was the only person in the entire chamber who looked at me for more than a second and kept looking. She was small by the standards of the beings around her. Gray-blue skin, wide dark eyes, fingers that were slightly too long. She sat perfectly still while everyone around her shifted and rustled and prepared for the session to begin. And she watched me with the kind of attention you give something that does not quite fit in a category you already have. I looked back at her. She did not look away. After a moment, I gave the same small nod I had given the Voreth delegate. She blinked, slowly, and then, with what I could only interpret as great deliberateness, she looked down at whatever document she was holding and did not look up again. A tone sounded through the chamber, low, resonant, the kind of sound that arrives in your chest before your ears process it. The 60-second session of the Galactic Council was called to order. The council secretary rose from her position at the central floor. She was a member of the administrative caste of the Pelori, which meant she was approximately 2.5 meters tall, had 4 arms, and held her speaking position with the absolute authority of someone who had managed rooms like this one for longer than most civilizations had existed. She began to speak. The translation earpiece murmured the words into my left ear half a second behind her voice. Attending delegates are requested to confirm their presence for the record. Names will be called in order of council seniority. It was routine, procedural, the kind of thing that happens at the start of every formal gathering in every organization across every world that has ever developed bureaucracy, which, it turns out, is all of them. She began reading. The Voreth delegate confirmed. The Quelari collective confirmed. The Shenvar, the Daelri, the commerce guilds, the Yeth Concordat representative. She glanced at me again as her own name was read. All of them confirmed in turn. And then the secretary reached the end of the list. She paused, just very briefly, half a breath. And finally, representing the planet Earth, 3rd world of the Sol system, attending in Tier 4 provisional observer capacity. Another half-breath pause. Kira Voss. I opened my mouth to say, confirmed, the same word every delegate before me had used. I did not get the chance. The chamber had gone quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a response. A different kind of quiet. The kind that lands like a change in air pressure. The kind that makes the small hairs on the back of your neck stand up even before your brain has understood why. The secretary was not looking at her document anymore. She was looking at me. Across the chamber, I heard something, a sound from the Voreth delegation that my earpiece translated after a short lag as a single word. Impossible. The Yeth Concordat representative had gone completely still. Somewhere behind me, I heard the quiet mechanical sound of the methane breather's environment pod beginning to move. I turned slightly. It was rolling backward toward the exit on its own. Nobody stopped it. Nobody was looking at it. Everyone was looking at me. I looked down at my name badge, which simply said Kira Voss, Earth in plain black text. I looked back up at the chamber full of beings who had, a moment ago, barely noticed I existed. Confirmed, I said. The word fell into the silence and disappeared. And then, from the front of the chamber, the eldest Voreth delegate rose slowly from his seat and said, in a voice that my earpiece rendered with a kind of careful flatness, I move for an immediate recess. He was seconded, before he had finished the sentence, by 6 different delegations. Simultaneously, the recess was called. I sat in my chair in the suddenly emptying chamber and watched beings who had navigated galactic politics for thousands of years move toward the exits with something that looked, if I was being accurate about it, like urgency. An aide appeared at my elbow, young Pelori with the wide, nervous eyes of someone doing their best. Delegate Voss, he said quietly. Yes. He leaned closer. I have been asked to tell you, respectfully, that you should not repeat your name aloud in the main chamber. I stared at him. My name, I said. Yes. Kira Voss. He flinched. Please, he said, not here. I looked at the chamber around me, half empty now, the lights somehow seeming different than they had 20 minutes ago. Can someone explain to me, I said very calmly, what just happened? The aide swallowed. Someone will speak with you, he said. Please wait. And then he left too. I sat alone in the back row of the Galactic Council chamber. I reached into my pocket. I had forgotten I had already eaten the protein bar. The hallway outside the main chamber was wide enough for a truck and had the particular acoustic quality of a space designed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Voices became soft here. Footsteps became suggestions. I had been sitting on a bench along the wall for approximately 12 minutes when I heard him coming. I did not look up immediately. I heard the sound of footsteps, heavier than a human's, with a slight double-beat rhythm that my briefing notes told me was characteristic of Voreth locomotion, and I heard the way the other sounds in the hallway adjusted around him, quieted, made room. Then I looked up. The Voreth delegate who had called the recess was taller in person than he had appeared from across the chamber. His gray skin had the kind of texture that comes from age rather than damage, and his eyes, all 4 of them, arranged in a shallow arc across his face, regarded me with an expression I did not yet have the vocabulary for. He did not sit. There was a second bench directly across from mine. He stood beside it and looked at me the way a geologist might look at a rock formation that did not fit the local strata. I am Elder Counselor Davin Veth Sor, he said. My earpiece delivered the name and then, after a small pause, added what it could only translate as second seat of permanence, Voreth primary. I have served on this council for 940 years. Kira Voss, I said, Earth, this is my 3rd week in the job. Something moved across his face. I filed it away. I am going to ask you some questions, he said. I would appreciate honest answers. I usually give those. How long, he said, has your species been aware of the existence of this council? Formally, about 60 years. We have known other intelligent species existed for longer, in a theoretical sense, but organized awareness of the council specifically 60 years, roughly. He was quiet for a moment. And your species has been engaged in organized conflict for how long? I thought about it. continuously in some form for as long as we have had recorded history, about 6,000 years at minimum, probably longer. He closed his eyes. Not in a dismissive way. In the way someone closes their eyes when they are absorbing something and need a moment to process it without additional input. "I see," he said. "I am not sure you mean that as a compliment," I said. "I do not mean it as anything yet," he said. "I am still deciding what I mean it as." He opened his eyes again. "I have a document I would like to show you. I want to be clear that sharing it with you is, technically, a procedural irregularity. I am choosing to do it anyway." He reached into the flat carrying case at his side and withdrew a bound report. It was thick, very thick. The kind of thickness that makes you reconsider your assumptions about what a report is supposed to accomplish. He held it out. I took it. The cover read in 7 languages, my earpiece helpfully translating all of them simultaneously into a mild headache. Species assessment and risk profile. Homo sapiens, Sol Roman 3, prepared by the Council's Office of Emergent Civilization Monitoring. "This is the Council's file on humanity," he said. "I can see that. It is 312 pages long." I looked up at him. "How long are most species files?" "New Tier 4 observers typically receive a file of between 8 and 22 pages. I looked back at the report in my hands. "Can I ask," I said carefully, "what is in the rest of it?" "A significant portion is redacted." "Redacted for what reason?" He was quiet for a moment, for the emotional protection of the reader. I opened the cover. The first unredacted section was titled, Conflict Behavior Assessment Summary. It described human warfare as continuous, adaptive, and demonstrating a degree of creative evolution not previously recorded in any Tier 4 species. Notably, human conflict does not appear to deplete the species' drive toward advancement. Paradoxically, periods of intensive conflict have historically accelerated technological development rather than emptying it. I turned the page. The next section was about human medicine. It was flagged with a yellow border. The heading read, Anomalous Recovery and Survivability Data. It described human medical history, our development of antibiotics, vaccines, surgical techniques, organ transplantation, in language that, rendered through my earpiece, came out as something close to borderline resurrection adjacent. I paused on that phrase for a moment. I turned another page. This section was about human responses to near-extinction events. It was flagged with a red border. It listed volcanic winters, plagues, global conflicts, ecological near collapses. In each case, the analyst notes read approximately the same way. Response, accelerated. Recovery time, anomalously short. Behavioral adaptation, significant. And then at the bottom of that page, a footnote. A footnote that read, This species does not appear to operate with an understanding of a threat ceiling. All attempts to model likely behavioral limits in stress scenarios have produced results outside expected parameters. See Appendix F. I checked the back of the report. Appendix F was one of the redacted sections. I closed the report. I held it in my lap for a moment and looked at the floor, which was made of something that was not quite stone and reflected light in a way that was not quite a mirror. Then I laughed. It was not a performance. It was the genuine, slightly helpless laugh of a person who has just understood a joke that was, in some sense, about them. The laugh of recognition. The laugh of someone who has spent her whole career in a small, underfunded office being told to go sit quietly in the back, and has just found out that the reason for this is not that she is unimportant, but that the people giving those instructions were, on some level, nervous. I laughed, and the sound of it went out into the acoustically absorbent hallway. An elder counselor, Davin Veth Sor, 940 years of council service, a species history that stretched back before written human language, took one careful step backward. I stopped laughing. "I apologize," I said. "That was not directed at you." "I understand that," he said, and then after a pause, "I think I understand that." "You flinched," I said. "I am aware." I set the report on the bench beside me. "Can I ask you something?" "You may." "What is in the redacted sections?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the hallway, somewhere in the depths of the building, I could hear the muffled sound of the other delegations in their various emergency conversations. "Projections," he said finally. "Modeling. The Council's analysts ran a series of scenarios examining what a species with your behavioral profile might develop into. Given access to full Council resources and full interstellar reach over the next 10,000 years. And he looked at me with all four of his eyes. And the analysts who completed the report requested reassignment to a different department afterward," he said. "3 of them retired entirely." I thought about that. "That is," I said slowly, "either very concerning or very flattering." "Yes," he said simply, "that is exactly the problem." He picked up his carrying case. "The session will reconvene shortly. There is a vote on the agenda. I believe you are aware of its general subject matter, at least in outline. Humanity's status, Tier 4 containment. The formal language is contained emergence designation. Yes," he paused. "I want you to know that the vote before today was expected to pass without significant opposition. And now," he looked at me for a long moment. "Now," he said, "I am not certain of anything I was certain of this morning." He turned and walked back toward the chamber. I sat on the bench in the quiet hallway, with 312 pages of alien analysis of my species resting beside me, and I thought about Director Whitmore telling me not to cause any incidents. Then I opened the report again and started reading from the beginning. I had about 15 minutes, and I intended to use all of them. The chamber was full again when I walked back in. The change was not visible in any dramatic way. No one was standing. No one was pointing. The seats were occupied in exactly the same arrangement as before, the same species in the same curved tiers, the same low ambient sounds of translation systems and environmental equipment. But the quality of the attention was different. Before, when I had walked in the first time, the room had the feeling of a place where no one is watching something unimportant. Now it had the feeling of a place where everyone was trying very hard to look like they were not watching something. I walked to my seat in the back row. I sat down. I placed the Council's 312-page assessment of humanity on the desk in front of me. Across the chamber, the Yeth Concordat representative, the small gray-blue woman with the 2 long fingers who had been watching me since the beginning, looked at the report and then at me. Something in her expression shifted slightly. I could not name it precisely. It was somewhere between recognition and reevaluation. I gave her the small nod. This time she nodded back. The secretary called the session to order. The procedural motions moved forward. Routine business. Allocation of resource observation rights in a disputed sector, 3 items. A report from the Environmental Collective on a newly discovered planet showing early biological complexity. A membership application from a species called the HFY, who had apparently spent 200 years trying to get the paperwork right and were finally approved, to a round of what my earpiece translated as formal acknowledgement sounds from the chamber. I listened. I took notes in the small notebook I had brought because I did not entirely trust digital devices in rooms where the ambient radiation from the translation network was strong enough to make my fillings tingle. And then the secretary announced the final agenda item. Motion 62-7, proposed designation of Homo sapiens, Sol Roman III, as a contained emergent species, under Council Provision 14, subsection 9, Full speaking rights to be suspended pending designation review. To be voted upon by present senior delegates. I looked at the report in front of me. I thought about the footnote, the one about threat ceilings, the one that had made me laugh in the hallway. I thought about the 3 analysts who had retired. I thought about the empty chair next to mine, and the methane breather's pod that had quietly left the room when my name was read. I thought about Paul Whitmore telling me to go sit quietly and not cause any incidents. I raised my hand. There was a sound from several parts of the chamber that my earpiece translated with some apparent difficulty as something between that is not procedurally correct and that cannot be happening. The secretary looked at me. Her 4 arms were very still. Delegate Voss, she said carefully, Tier 4 observer status does not include floor speaking rights. I know, I said, but I have a procedural question, not a statement. Under Council Provision 3, subsection 12, any entity directly affected by a motion in progress has the right to request clarification of the motion's scope before the vote is called. Is that correct? The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then the secretary looked at the legal reference panel to her left. A small consultation happened. A note was passed. That is, she said, with the slight flatness of someone reading a result they had not expected, correct. Thank you, I said. My question is this. Provision 14, subsection 9, the subsection being cited for this motion, was last applied 4,300 years ago. The relevant clause requires that the species in question has demonstrated an inability to self-regulate emergent capabilities in a manner consistent with the safety of neighboring civilizations. I paused. In the 60 years since first contact between humanity and the wider galactic community, has any human action resulted in demonstrable harm to any neighboring civilization? The chamber was quiet. That, I said, is the scope clarification I am requesting. It requires only a yes or no from the provision's legal office. The legal reference panel consulted again. Longer this time. I watched 3 different aliens in 3 different parts of the chamber have very quiet, very fast conversations. Elder Counselor Davin Veth Sor, in the front row, was looking at his desk. The legal panel representative, a being who looked like a tall, serious collection of geometric shapes, stood. The answer, she said carefully, is no. No documented human action in the specified period has resulted in demonstrable harm to any neighboring civilization. Thank you, I said. I looked down at my notebook. I had written 1 line in it before the session resumed in the corridor. I had written, they are afraid of what we might become, not what we are. I looked up. I would like to offer a counter-proposal, I said. Under Provision 7, subsection 2, any delegate with standing may introduce an alternative motion prior to vote if the alternative addresses the same concern through different means. I have standing as the representative of the species under discussion. The provision applies. The sound from the chamber was not translatable, but it was interesting. My counter-proposal, I said, is that humanity be reclassified from Tier 4 provisional observer to emergent sovereign status, with full speaking rights, conditional representation rights pending a 2-cycle review period, and a mutual non-interference framework to be negotiated within the current session. I paused. This addresses the Council's concern about human development by bringing us into the room, with accountability, rather than managing us from the outside, without our knowledge or consent. I set my pen down. You have had a file on my species for 60 years, I said. We did not know, we were not asked, and the file you built by your own analyst's accounts was alarming enough that the people who wrote it did not want to work here anymore. I paused. I have read that file. I understand why it alarmed them. I am human. I know what we are. I know what we have been through and what it made us. I let that sit for a moment. But here is what your file does not account for. Every catastrophe we survived together. Every limit we pushed past, we pushed because the alternative was stopping. We are not a species that stops. I looked around the chamber, at the Vorath, at the Quellari's slowly moving branches, at the Yeth Concordat representative who was watching me with those wide dark eyes and something in them that I was only now beginning to read correctly. We are, however, a species that can be talked to, that can negotiate, that can, when treated as an equal, behave like one. I picked up my pen again. The choice in front of this council is not between a safe humanity and a dangerous one. It is between a humanity that is in this room, accountable and present, and a humanity that is outside this room, unaccountable and growing. I paused. I know which one I would choose. I closed my notebook. That is my counter-proposal. I am happy to answer questions. The chamber was very quiet. And then from the front row, Elder Counselor Davin Veth Sor raised his hand. The secretary called on him. I would like, he said slowly, to hear the counter-proposal read into the formal record. 3 other delegations seconded it before he had finished speaking. The vote on motion 62-7, the contained emergence designation, was called. It failed. 16 in favor, 29 against, 4 abstentions. The counter-proposal was introduced formally. It passed. 27 in favor, 13 against, 9 abstentions, most of whom I suspected were still processing the last 45 minutes. The secretary announced the result. Humanity, Sol Roman 3, is hereby reclassified from Tier 4 Provisional Observer to Emergent Sovereign status, with the conditions as stated. The Mutual Non-Interference Framework discussion will be scheduled for the next available session slot. She looked at me. Delegate Voss, you now have full speaking rights. Thank you, I said. I wrote one more line in my notebook. Paul is going to be furious. I stayed in the chamber after the session closed. Not because I had to. Not because anyone asked me to. I stayed because I wanted to sit in the quiet for a moment, in the vast circular room with its improbable ceiling, and let the last few hours arrange themselves into something I could carry. The aides were moving through the space, collecting documents, adjusting the environmental controls for the overnight period. They worked around me with the careful courtesy of people who were not sure yet exactly what category I belonged to. I did not mind. I was used to being uncategorized. Elder Counselor Davin Veth Sor found me there, after most of the others had gone. He sat down. Not across from me this time, 1 seat away on the same tier, the posture of a person who has decided to be less formal. You read the entire file, he said. It was not a question. The unredacted parts, yes. In 15 minutes. I read quickly. He was quiet for a moment. The counter-proposal, did you prepare it before the session? No, I wrote the first line of it in the corridor during the recess. The rest I put together while the other agenda items were running. In your head. In my head. He looked at the empty chamber around them. Do you know what the Vorath have been afraid of for the last 6,000 years? Not specifically. A species like yours, he said. Not a hostile species, a persistent one. We have seen hostile species. We know how to manage hostility. What we do not have a model for is a species that survives everything, learns from everything, and still wants to talk. He paused. Your file exists because for 60 years we have been trying to build a model for you, and every time we complete it, something happens on your planet that breaks it. I thought about that. What was the most recent thing that broke it? 14 years ago, your species had a global biological event. The modeling predicted a recovery period of 40 to 60 years, with significant civilizational regression. We were mostly back to normal in 3, I said. Yes. And that broke the model. It retired 3 analysts, he said. Yes. I smiled. It was a small smile, and I kept it to myself mostly. Can I ask you something? I said. You may. The name, what does it actually mean? I have been trying to get a straight answer from the translation system, but it keeps rendering it as something poetic and vague. He was quiet for a moment. In Old Veth, the language that predates the Common Translation Network by approximately 20,000 years, the phonetic combination represented by your name is a designation that was used very rarely for a specific class of entity. He paused. Entities that had survived the end of their own era, civilizations that had passed through what we call a great dissolution, a collapse so complete that nothing of the previous structure remained and continued, not as a remnant, as something new, grown from the same root. I listened. The designation was considered mythological, he continued. A story-class concept. We did not think it described anything real. And then your Secretary General filed your species' historical summary with our intake office as part of the Tier 4 application, and our archival translation system processed your name, and the word it produced was that designation. And the session secretary saw it and told the relevant people, yes, he paused, she was quite distressed. I thought about Director Whitmore handing me a thin folder and telling me not to cause incidents. It is a coincidence, I said. My name in English is ordinary. My grandmother chose it because she liked the way it sounded. I know, he said. That is, if anything, what concerns people most. He paused. A species that earns a mythological title on purpose can be understood, can be predicted. A species that stumbles into one while eating a protein bar and looking for the bathroom is much harder to plan around. I looked at him. You saw the protein bar. We have very good observation systems, he said, and there was something in his expression that it took me a moment to identify. In 4 eyes arranged in an arc across a gray face, belonging to a being 940 years old. It was, if I was reading correctly, the closest thing to amusement he had allowed himself in some time. Elder Counselor, I said. Davin is acceptable, he said. Davin, I looked at the chamber around us, at the vast, empty, quietly humming space that smelled of ozone and history. What happens now? Now, he said, there will be a great deal of quiet, anxious conversation in many languages in many rooms about what today means. Some delegations will be angry, some will be frightened, some will be curious. He paused. And then, because this is the Galactic Council and it has been doing this for a very long time, it will adapt. It always adapts. And humanity. He looked at me, all 4 eyes, the full attention of something that had watched civilizations rise and change and be reborn across 9 centuries of council service. I believe, he said carefully, that humanity will be fine. I nodded. I would appreciate it, he said, if you would file a full report with your government. Specifically, I would appreciate if the report made clear that this council's intentions toward your species are not hostile. There has been a great deal of fear on this side of the conversation. It would be counterproductive for that fear to be misread. I will make that clear, I said. Thank you. He stood, picked up his carrying case, paused. Delegate Voss, he said. Kira is acceptable, I said. The corner of his mouth, or what served as its equivalent, moved very slightly. Kira, for what it is worth, he paused. You spoke well today, clearly and without performance. That is rarer than it should be in rooms like this one. Thank you. Do not thank me, he said. It was an observation, not a compliment. He walked out. I sat alone in the chamber for a little longer. Then I got out my notebook and started drafting the report for Paul Whitmore. I wrote at the top, no significant incidents. Then I crossed that out. I wrote some procedural developments, update to follow. I looked at it. I crossed that out too. I wrote, you're going to want to sit down for this. That felt honest. I left it. The next morning I arrived at the chamber early. The aides were still setting up. The environmental systems were cycling through their morning routines. The vast ceiling was doing something with its lighting that I had not seen the day before, shifting through a slow sequence of colors in a way that the aide who showed me and explained was a traditional dawn acknowledgement, a ritual the chamber had maintained for thousands of years regardless of whether there was an actual sky above it. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched it. Then I walked to my seat. My seat had been moved. I stopped. The back row, where I had sat yesterday, was arranged exactly as before: the sealed pod for the methane breather, the empty chair with the clearance plaque. But the chair that had been beside them, my chair, with my nameplate on the small desk in front of it, was gone. I looked around. The aide who had shown me in appeared at my elbow. "Delegate Voss," he said, "your seating assignment was updated this morning, by order of the Secretary's office." "Where?" I said. He gestured toward the front of the chamber. I walked forward, through the curving tiers, past the delegations beginning to file in for the morning session. The Voreth were already seated. Davenvethsor saw me coming and gave a single, very small nod. Front row, center arc, the heart of the chamber where the oldest and most senior delegation sat. My nameplate was there. Kira Voss Earth, in plain black text on a desk in the front row. The chair on my left was the Voreth delegations. The chair on my right was empty. But it was a different kind of empty than the chair at the back had been. The chair at the back had been empty because it was waiting for biological clearance that might never come. This chair was empty the way a chair is empty when someone has not arrived yet, when there is space being held for someone expected. I sat down. The chamber was filling. The Quelari were settling their branches. The Shenvar were arranging their materials. The Yeth Concordat representative came in, saw where I was sitting, and stopped walking for a brief moment before continuing to her own place. She sat down. And then she looked across the chamber at me, for the third time in 2 days. But this time it was not the measuring look of someone trying to fit an unfamiliar thing into an existing category. It was something else. I had been trying to name that expression since yesterday. I thought I had it now. It was the look of someone who has been watching a story unfold and has just arrived at the part where the shape of it becomes clear. The look of recognition. The look of someone who thought they knew how things worked and has found, not with alarm but with something almost like relief, that they were wrong. The session tone sounded. I opened my notebook. I wrote one line at the top of a fresh page. Day 2. And then I picked up my pen, and I was ready.